His military instincts immediately began assessing his surroundings, but what he saw didn't fit any profile, any scenario he had trained for. There, in the middle of the courtyard, was a figure writhing on the ground, blood pooling beneath them. But it wasn't the sight of the dying person that caught Marcus off guard, it was what stood over them. The creature, if you could even call it that, was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen in combat, training, or even nightmares. It towered, standing unnaturally still despite the carnage it had caused. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but twisted and elongated in ways that made his mind reel. Its skin was an odd shade, somewhere between pale gray and mottled brown, almost translucent in patches. Jagged bones jutted unnaturally from its limbs, yet it moved with an eerie fluidity, its head tilted as though it were listening, waiting. It didn't have eyes, at least not in the way Marcus recognized, but there were dark, empty sockets where eyes should have been, just black, hollow voids that somehow tracked the dying figure beneath it. Its mouth was a grotesque slash, far too wide, filled with jagged, irregular teeth. Yet it made no sound, its breath unnervingly silent. The creature was feeding, not like an animal, but like a new kind of predator. Its long claw-like fingers were buried deep into the person's body, but not just tearing flesh. It was as if it was drawing something out more than blood, something vital, something unseen. The victim's body convulsed, their life draining in ways that defied biology. Marcus' breath caught in his throat. He had faced death before, had delivered it with precision and survived it more times than he could count. But this was something different. The creature was beyond explanation, a predator of a kind Marcus couldn't have imagined even in the most hostile environments he had encountered. For a split second, his tactical mind raced through options. But what could he do against something like this? Would bullets even work? His body screamed at him to act, but his mind hesitated, unsure for the first time in years. He glanced at the SIG in his hand, suddenly feeling its weight. It had always been a reliable tool, something that could solve almost any problem, but could it solve this? The creature's head snapped toward him. Though it had no eyes, Marcus felt it look right at him, deep into him. It was as if it recognized him, like it was measuring him up, considering whether to make him its next target. Marcus took a step back, his grip tightening on the SIG. Marcus's instincts kicked in immediately. His breath slowed, his pulse steady despite the nightmare unfolding before him. He locked eyes with the creature, its grotesque form a blur of shifting jagged edges. Whatever it was, he wasn't sticking around to find out if his 9mm would be enough. Quickly and methodically, he raised his Sig Sauer, taking aim at the thing's head. In one smooth motion, he squeezed the trigger twice. Crack, crack. The rounds hit their mark, dead center. Marcus felt a flicker of satisfaction at the clean shots, the muscle memory sharp despite the years since he'd last held a weapon. The creature recoiled, its otherworldly shriek echoing through the dimly lit courtyard. It didn't like that, at all. The shot slowed it down, its body writhing as if in pain, but Marcus could tell this was no ordinary opponent. It wasn't dead, not by a long shot. He didn't wait to see what it would do next. With quick, deliberate steps, he sprinted toward the door. His senses were sharp, calculating his next move. He needed cover, somewhere to regroup, rethink, and reevaluate what exactly they were dealing with here. He could hear the creature's distorted growl behind him, but he didn't dare look back. It was gaining speed again. The door was just ahead. He hit it hard, throwing his weight into it as he burst through, slamming it shut behind him. His chest rose and fell with deep, controlled breaths. Marcus could hear the creature clawing on the other side, but for now, he was safe. He had slowed it down, but not for long. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human, and those rounds weren't enough to put it down for good. Get it together, he muttered under his breath, eyes darting around the room, searching for anything he could use to barricade the door. The mansion was toying with them, and if this was the kind of game it wanted to play, Marcus knew he'd need more than just a 9mm. He might even need all that gear back in the room he didn't want the others to know about. As Marcus leaned against the door, heart pounding but mind sharp, the scratching and growling from the creature continued just on the other side. The door was wooden, old, and worn. By all logic, it should have given way already. But it held firm, the creature seemingly unable to break through. Marcus frowned, glancing around the room. There was no way this flimsy barrier could stop whatever that thing was. His instincts told him something else was at play, something he didn't yet understand. His mind flickered back to the cave they had sheltered in earlier, to the strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that had made his skin crawl with a sense of foreboding. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the walls of the mansion around him, noticing faint markings he hadn't paid attention to before. Intricate patterns and symbols, some familiar, Some not, just like the ones in the cave. Was the mansion protecting them somehow? It seemed absurd, but Marcus had seen his share of strange things in the world. Not like this though, this was a whole new level of weird. Whatever was on the walls, it was holding back that creature. He couldn't explain it yet, but it didn't matter. He needed to figure out what these symbols meant. Julia might be able to help. After all, she was good at decoding things, seeing patterns where others didn't. Marcus took a steadying breath, his thoughts racing but controlled. The mansion wasn't what it seemed, none of this was. And whatever had drawn them here, it wasn't random. Marcus sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, replaying the events of the shootout in his mind. His hands were steady now, but his heart still raced. The others stood nearby, sensing something was off, but kept their distance. Julia watched him closely, her sharp green eyes filled with concern. She knew him too well. Whatever he had just faced, it had been serious. But she also knew better than to press him for answers right now. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to ground himself, but couldn't shake the strange exhilaration coursing through him. He hadn't felt this way in years. Scared, yes, but also alive, like a part of him long buried had been reignited. He hated to admit it, but there was a thrill in what had just happened, something that disturbed him almost as much as the encounter itself. But as his eyes flicked to Julia, standing there so calm and steady, his priorities snapped back into focus. No matter what was happening, his main goal was keeping her safe. He'd figure out the rest, no matter how insane it all seemed. For now though, he couldn't share what he'd seen. Not yet. Marcus shifted his position against the cold wall, leaning his head back as Lucas approached. He could sense the doctor's patience thinning. The look in Lucas's eyes was demanding, searching for an explanation. What the hell was it, Marcus? Lucas finally broke the silence. You can't just sit there after something like that. What did you see? Marcus wiped a hand across his face, buying himself a few more seconds. He wasn't ready to reveal everything yet, not what that thing looked like, not the strange feeling of exhilaration that had coursed through him when the shots rang out. He wasn't even sure how to explain it. But he couldn't leave them completely in the dark either. He glanced around at the others. Amber stood close to Lucas, visibly shaken, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if shielding herself from the unknown. Julia was watching him, trying to read his expression. Even Mike had crept closer, his usual jittery demeanor now replaced by a haunted stillness. The mansion, Marcus began, his voice steady but low. Might be more than just a place we found. I don't know how to explain it yet, but out there, it's dangerous. Worse than we thought. Lucas stared at him, his frustration growing. That's not what I asked. What was out there? We heard the screaming, Marcus. What did you face? Marcus stood up, running a hand through his hair. Look, I don't know exactly what it was, he admitted, his eyes hardening. It wasn't human. But this place, this mansion, it might be the safest option we have for now. The safest option? Lucas shot back, incredulous. You're telling me this house is a haven? How can you say that after whatever just happened out there? Marcus locked eyes with him. Because I've seen enough horror out in the world to know when something's worse than the rest. Whatever's out there. His gaze flickered briefly to the front door. Is hunting, and I don't think it's done yet. The room fell silent for a beat as Marcus's words sank in. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Amber and Mike exchanged uneasy glances, and Julia's eyes were still fixed on Marcus, her concern deepening. I'm not saying we're safe here forever, Marcus continued, shifting his stance. But we need to take stock of what we've got, get organized, and figure out how to deal with whatever's out there. Right now, this mansion is shelter. And that's the only thing keeping us alive. The tension in the room remained thick, but there was a shift in the atmosphere. They weren't ready to fully trust Marcus's theory, but they had no choice but to accept it, for now. As gunshots echoed from somewhere just outside the mansion courtyard, Marcus snapped to attention. His instincts kicked in immediately, his hand going to his cig as he rose to his feet. The others looked at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. Lucas opened his mouth to say something, but Marcus had already moved toward the door. Stay here, Marcus ordered, his voice clipped. Not a chance, Julia countered, grabbing her jacket and following him without hesitation. Lucas and Amber exchanged a look before they too moved to follow. Outside, the sky was dark, heavy with storm clouds, and the wind howled through the trees. The gunshots had stopped, but in their place were screams. Bone-chilling screams that sent a shiver down Julia's spine. The same creature Marcus had encountered was out there, and now, they weren't the only ones in danger. They reached the edge of the mansion's grounds and saw them. A group of 4 men running frantically through the trees, their faces twisted in fear. One of them fired a single revolver, the sound echoing through the forest, but it was clear they had no idea what they were dealing with. There had been 7 of them, but 3 had already fallen behind, their bodies torn apart by something lurking in the shadows. The creature was fast, a blur of movement through the trees. Even from the distance, Marcus could see it, and for the first time, so did the others. Julia gasped. Amber froze, and Lucas muttered a curse under his breath. "Get inside," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he waved the group toward the mansion. "Hurry!" The 5 remaining men glanced up, their eyes wide with terror. They bolted toward Marcus and the others, their feet pounding against the ground as the creature closed in behind them. One of the men stumbled, falling to the ground, and the others barely slowed to help him up, the raw panic pushing them forward. "Come on!" Julia yelled, waving them on as they neared the door. Just as they reached the mansion steps, the creature lunged, its claws tearing through the air. The last man to scramble up the stairs barely made it, his jacket shredded by the beast's swipe. He stumbled into the mansion, collapsing in a heap, breathing heavily. Marcus slammed the door shut just as the creature crashed against it, the force rattling the wood. For a moment, the group stood frozen, listening to the thing outside, its low growls and scrapes against the door filling the air. The 4 men were huddled together, panting, their eyes wide with shock. The 3 friends in the group exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but definitely giving off a dangerous vibe. What the hell was that?" One of them finally gasped, the revolver shaking in his hand. Marcus didn't answer right away. He glanced at the others, Julia, Lucas, Amber, and saw the same mixture of fear and confusion on their faces. Whatever was happening, the mansion wasn't just a haven anymore, it was turning into a battlefield. First of the new arrivals was Frank, his sharp eyes taking in every detail as if already calculating his next move. Right behind him, Zane sauntered in, broad-shouldered and cocky, with a smirk that mocked the danger they had just escaped. Tyler followed, pale and shaken, glancing back at the door as though the creature's breath was still on his neck. Bruce entered last, chest heaving, his wary eyes scanning the dimly lit hall. Though they were strangers in the mansion, their names would soon be known to everyone within. As soon as Zane sees Julia, a smug grin stretches across his face. His eyes sweep over her in a way that immediately sets her on edge. Well, Zane says with a slow drawl, leaning slightly closer. "Didn't expect to find something so fine out here in the middle of nowhere." "Lucky me?" Julia's expression doesn't change, but inside she's already diagnosing him. The casual arrogance, the way he carried himself, the invasive gaze, it all pointed to something she'd seen before in some of her most difficult cases. He wasn't just a flirt, he was manipulative, used to testing boundaries to see how far he could go. Dangerous. "How about you save the sweet talk for someone who's interested," Julia replied, her voice even, not giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. Zane chuckled, stepping back, clearly unfazed by her rejection. "Feisty, I like that." Marcus, standing nearby, had already noticed the interaction. His jaw tightened slightly, but he knew better than to step in and cause a scene, especially now. Julia was more than capable of handling herself, and he trusted her judgment. Still, the tension in his shoulders betrayed his annoyance. Frank, watching the whole exchange, finally intervened. "Zane, cut it out. We don't have time for this." Zane smirked but didn't push it further, falling in line as Frank's voice took control. Without missing a beat, Zane shrugged off the rejection like it didn't matter. His gaze shifted to Amber, who stood just a few steps away. Moving in close, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, his voice soft but unsettling. "Don't you worry," he said, a strange gleam in his eye. "I saw you too." Julia shot Marcus a glance, and he gave a subtle nod. Marcus, quietly, but with intent. "What do you think about these 3? Julia lets her gaze drift from Zane to Frank, studying the 2 before turning back to Marcus. She crosses her arms, her voice calm, almost clinical. "Frank's clearly the one in charge. Zane might be the loudmouth, but it's Frank who holds the leash." When he told Zane to back off, Zane didn't question it. That kind of compliance only comes from established dominance. Frank has probably asserted his authority before, maybe through force or sheer presence. I noticed that. Zane, on the other hand, is more impulsive. He's the type that enjoys provoking people, testing boundaries. He's narcissistic, no doubt. He wanted to see how much he could get away with, especially with Amber and me. But when Frank stepped in, Zane backed down. That tells me Zane's dangerous, but only as long as Frank allows it. Criminals? Most likely. Frank's control over Zane suggests experience in situations where that kind of order is necessary. Prison, gangs, something along those lines. Zane's behavior feels more erratic, like someone who thrives on chaos but is kept in check by someone stronger. Frank's control over him is absolute, which makes Frank the real threat here. Marcus looks back at Frank, who seems content to sit quietly, watching over his group. Julia continues, her voice steady and analytical. Tyler's quieter, more reserved. He avoids eye contact and keeps his body language closed off, which suggests he's not the leader, but a follower. He's uncomfortable, maybe even guilty about something. Frank doesn't seem to bother with him too much, which makes me think Tyler's the least of our concerns. So we focus on Frank? Yes. Frank's the one calling the shots. Zane's dangerous, but Frank's the real power. If things go south, he's the one we need to watch out for. He's the one who can control the chaos, or unleash it. All right, we'll keep an eye on him. Julia smirks slightly, knowing Marcus already had his suspicions. I figured you already were. There's a moment of silence between them as Marcus looks at Julia. His gaze lingers a little longer than usual, not just because of what she said, but because of how effortlessly she delivered it. Her calm, precise analysis and her ability to see through people impress him. He appreciates her depth of knowledge, but more than that, her ability to stay composed, even under these circumstances, stands out. Marcus, with a small, respectful nod. You're good at this? You know that? Julia raises an eyebrow, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. It's my job. Marcus gives her a rare, genuine smile before turning back toward the window, feeling grateful she's on his side. The other man from the group stood near the door, still in shock and trembling from the ordeal he had just faced outside. He was unresponsive, barely able to process what had happened, much less speak. Marcus quickly assessed him, seeing no immediate threat, at least not from him. His wide, empty stares told him he weren't a problem, not now. He were just too shaken to be of any use. But Lucas, on the other hand, was bristling. He hadn't taken his eyes off Zane since the crude remark earlier, his face hard and cold with restrained anger. Marcus noticed how Lucas's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. There was more to him than Marcus had initially thought, and this reaction to Zane told Marcus something valuable. Lucas wasn't just a doctor, he was a man who could stand his ground when it mattered. Amber, always calm under pressure, seemed to sense Lucas's rising frustration. She leaned in, her voice a soft whisper as she tried to soothe him. Relax, Lucas, she said, her words gentle but firm. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm, trying to keep the peace for now. Marcus watched this interaction closely, feeling a small smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. Lucas had guts. He wasn't just some book-smart doctor, there was something deeper, perhaps a quiet strength that Marcus could respect. He liked that. A man like Lucas, though initially unassuming, showed the kind of courage that wasn't loud or boastful, but steady and reliable. He could work with that. Good, Marcus thought to himself. The doctor's got guts. It made Marcus feel a bit more comfortable having someone like Lucas around, someone who wouldn't let the likes of Zane push them around or manipulate them. Zane, on the other hand, was still grinning to himself, clearly amused by his own twisted sense of humor. But Marcus's focus shifted away from Zane for the moment. He had bigger concerns, like the creatures outside and the growing tension within the group. But at least with Lucas, Marcus had one more person he could hopefully count on, and in a place like this, that was worth more than anything. As Amber and Lucas stood together in the unsettling atmosphere of the mansion, the weight of their shared experiences as trauma staff hung between them. Both were accustomed to the chaos of the hospital, but this felt different, raw and primal. Amber's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the tension that surrounded them, a trait that had helped her manage the most chaotic of situations in the ER. She had a way of reassuring those around her, even when their lives hung in the balance. Lucas, on the other hand, was more reserved. The shock of their recent experiences had left him silent, his mind racing with thoughts that he struggled to articulate. He shot glances at Zane, irritation flashing in his eyes at how the man had spoken to Amber. He knew that in the hospital, they relied on each other, and here, in this strange place, that bond was more vital than ever. Amber? Lucas finally said, his voice low but steady. Stay close to me. I don't want you out of my sight, not here. Amber nodded, her blue eyes bright with determination. I'm not going anywhere. We'll face this together. They moved closer, the unspoken understanding between them strong. Amber appreciated Lucas's protective instincts, and she knew that his medical expertise would be essential if anything went wrong. But there was also a part of her that wanted to reassure him, to remind him that they were a team both inside and outside the hospital. As the tension in the room escalated, she whispered, "Just focus on us. We can handle whatever this is, as long as we're together." Lucas looked at her, a flicker of gratitude passing through his features. In that moment, Amber felt a surge of resolve. No matter how daunting the situation became, they would navigate it side by side. Marcus turned to Frank, his curiosity piqued. "Where are you guys from? How did you end up here?" Zane immediately cut in with a cocky grin. "We're just hikers, man. Out enjoying nature." But Frank, with a steady gaze, interrupted him. "No, we were hiking with a bigger group of close friends, but the three of us got lost when we strayed off the path. Things got messy. We lost all our gear when we got attacked by those things." He glanced around, his expression hardening. Marcus nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "You're lucky to have that revolver?" he said, nodding toward the gun in Frank's possession. Frank shrugged, but before he could respond, he redirected the conversation. "What about those things outside?" Marcus and Julia exchanged a quick, alarmed glance. "Things?" Marcus echoed, his heart pounding. "You're talking about more than one?" Frank's face turned serious. "We heard them, growls and screams. It didn't sound like anything natural. What are we dealing with here?" As the tension in the room mounted, Mike suddenly appeared from the hallway, his disheveled hair slightly more arranged, and his clothes a little less wrinkled. He leaned against the doorframe, blinking sleepily as he asked, "What's going on? Why are you making so much noise?" "I was trying to sleep." His voice was hoarse, but there was a surprising clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The four of them, Julia, Marcus, Lucas, and Amber, exchanged glances, taken aback by his unexpected improvement. Mike's demeanor still carried an edge of unease, but he looked a lot more solid than the last time they had seen him. Julia could see the signs of someone who had pulled themselves back from the brink, and it surprised her. She had assumed that Mike would remain a wreck given the state he was in before. "What are you doing out here?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, though he felt the urge to protect the group from any potential danger Mike might represent. Mike shrugged, pushing himself off the doorframe. "I heard you guys talking about those things. What's going on?" Amber, still processing the changes in Mike, spoke up cautiously. "We're trying to figure out what's out there. Do you know anything?" Mike paused, his expression darkening as he glanced down the hall. "More than you'd think. You're not safe out there. Not with those things hunting." Mike looked at them, a calm yet bewildered expression on his face. "I don't know shit," he said, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of confusion. "All I can say is I was being hunted by mushrooms and colorful shit for 2 days. I don't even remember how the fuck I got here." His admission hung in the air, adding a surreal layer to the already strange situation. The others exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. "Wait, what do you mean hunted by mushrooms?" Lucas asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Mike shrugged, his hands gesturing helplessly. "I wish I knew. One moment, I was somewhere else. Then I woke up here. I think I was on some kind of dig-time drugs, maybe not even taken by me but given to me. I don't remember anything clearly." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for the missing pieces of his memory. Amber took a step closer, concern flickering across her face. "You mean someone drugged you?" "Could be," Mike replied, his voice softening. "All I know is I'm way more clueless than you guys probably imagined." He leaned against the wall, visibly more solid than before but still on the edge of something dark. "I'm just trying to piece together what's real and what's not." Suddenly, Mike looked up at the group, his expression shifting from confusion to casual curiosity. "So, where can I buy some food?" he asked, as if they were discussing the lunch menu at a cafe rather than the bizarre circumstances surrounding them. Without waiting for a response, he turned around and strolled down one of the mansion's eerie hallways, hands casually tucked into his pockets, as if he were having a Sunday stroll at the local mall. The stark contrast between his relaxed demeanor and the tense atmosphere left the rest of the group in stunned silence. Julia exchanged a glance with Marcus, her brows furrowed. "Is he serious?" "Seems like it," Marcus replied, his voice low, his instincts on high alert. "Let's hope he doesn't get too lost." Lucas shook his head, clearly frustrated. "We need to stick together, this place is not safe." Amber sighed, watching Mike disappear around a corner. "We should follow him. Who knows what he'll stumble into?" With a shared understanding of the necessity to keep an eye on Mike, the group moved to follow him, the sense of unease growing with each step they took deeper into the mansion. As the group cautiously trailed after Mike, Marcus's focus shifted when he noticed Taylor, one of the group, snooping around the mansion lobby, his eyes scanning the rooms and hallways. Marcus's instincts kicking in again, he couldn't risk Taylor stumbling onto the cache of military equipment he'd found earlier. Marcus felt an unsettling urge to ensure their temporary haven remained secure. He turned and made his way back towards the room he and Julia had initially explored, his eyes scanning for something, anything, that could provide a semblance of safety. It was then he spotted a large, peculiar-looking key resting on a nearby table. Curiosity piqued, he picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hand. Its intricate design hinted at a level of craftsmanship that was far beyond what he'd seen in everyday life. This key had a story, and he was determined to discover it. With a swift motion, he made his way to the door of their room, heart racing as he inserted the key into the lock. To his surprise, the key slid in with an ease he hadn't anticipated, turning smoothly as if it had been waiting for him all along. Marcus couldn't help but admire the lock's construction. He had spent years mastering the art of lockpicking, familiar with all shapes and sizes of locks, but this one was different. It was a marvel of engineering, far more advanced than anything he had encountered before. As the click of the lock echoed softly in the air, a sense of relief washed over him. At least for now, they had some control over their environment. He turned back to the group, his thoughts racing. The implications of this key, along with the criminals they were dealing with, filled him with a mix of concern and fascination. This place held secrets, details that the average person would never understand. Got it locked, he announced to himself, a hint of pride in his voice, yet the unease lingered in the back of his mind. I should keep an eye on Mike and figure out what's going on here. Later that day, as all of them sat uncomfortably in the massive lobby of the creepy mansion, Marcus and the others engaged in conversation with Frank, it became increasingly clear that the trio's story didn't add up. The tension in the room heightened as Marcus could sense the unease radiating from the three men. Where are you guys from? Marcus asked again, maintaining a casual tone but letting the underlying intensity seep through. Frank shrugged, his demeanor too relaxed. Oh, just a couple of hikers. Lost our way like I said, that's all. Meanwhile, Zane's gaze drifted into the distance, lost in his own thoughts. Memories flooded back, the chaos of the bus ambush, the muffled sounds of the struggle, the sight of one of their friends getting hit by the bus and the other falling to the ground, a shotgun wound to the head, blood everywhere. The horror of that moment replayed in his mind, but he kept it to himself, not revealing too much. Marcus pressed on, sensing the tension. What really happened out there? Frank shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, while Zane continued to recall the gruesome details. They barely managed to escape, fleeing into the mountains with only one revolver left, the aftermath of desperation and violence lingering in his mind. Before he could delve deeper into his thoughts, a distant sound shattered the tension. A scream echoed outside. What was that? Lucas murmured, his eyes darting toward the door. Stay put, Marcus commanded, though the urgency of the situation drew everyone's attention outside. Suddenly, Mike appeared from the hallway, looking significantly more alert than before. What's all this noise? He asked, irritation lacing his voice. I'm trying to sleep. His unexpected entrance broke the tension in the room. Zane snapped back to reality, the weight of his recollections dissipating as Mike ambled through like he was taking a leisurely stroll. Did you guys bring back any food? Mike continued, his demeanor oddly casual, adding an unsettling layer to the unfolding drama. Marcus exchanged glances with Julia, Amber, and Lucas, all aware that something was off with Mike. As they processed the chaotic situation, the tension between them and the newcomers became palpable, hinting at conflicts yet to come. The scream outside rattled through the mansion's dim corridors, making everyone freeze. Frank, his hand still on his sidearm, exchanged a glance with Tyler, who seemed on edge. Zane, for once, looked genuinely unsettled. Who the hell is that? Bruce muttered, backing toward the door they'd just come through. Could it be the... But before he could say another word, Frank shot him a vicious glare and he fell silent instantly. Before anyone could respond, there was a loud banging on the door, followed by another panicked scream from outside. Let me in. Please, let me in. It must be that guy, Colin, Zane muttered, half in disbelief. Can't believe he made it. His usual creepy tone wavered as if even he wasn't sure whether to be relieved or worried. The pounding on the door grew more frantic, Colin's voice outside sounding desperate. Please, let me in. It's right behind me. Everyone hesitated, the tension thick in the air as they exchanged uneasy glances. Colin's voice cracked from outside, pleading once more. Please, let me in. Without waiting, Marcus sprinted to the door and yanked it open. Colin stumbled inside, collapsing to his knees. His jacket was streaked with blood, Not his own, but from something far worse. His eyes were wide, almost wild with terror, darting around the room as if expecting the monster to burst in after him at any moment. His face, pale and twisted with fear, told the story of the horror he'd barely escaped. Breathing heavily, Colin looked up, his voice shaky. It's still out there. Thank you, Colin repeated, barely able to catch his breath as he clutched his bloody jacket. His eyes flicked to the door behind him, still full of fear. It's out there, he said, voice trembling. I barely made it. Frank stepped forward, his expression both surprised and skeptical. We thought you were a goner, Colin. How the hell did you get away? Just before we first saw the monster, you were gone. We didn't know what happened to you. How did you escape? Colin swallowed hard, his hands shaking. I don't even know. One minute I was with you guys, the next, that thing came out of nowhere. I ran, hid in the village. It must have lost track of me for a second, long enough to find my way here. He looked up at them, still panting. I thought I was dead. So, he's with you guys? Marcus asked, his gaze sharp as he looked over at Frank and the others, trying to figure out if Colin was really part of their group or if he might be another unpredictable element, maybe even a threat. His instincts, honed, told him to stay cautious, especially given everything they'd encountered so far. Frank nodded, though his face showed a mix of relief and lingering doubt. Yeah, he was with us before everything went to hell. But? Frank hesitated, glancing at Colin. It's hard to say what happened out there. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he studied Colin. Something felt off. So, he's not one of yours? He asked again, this time with more suspicion in his tone. Frank shook his head slowly. No, not really. We came across him by chance before things went sideways. Thought he was just another survivor like us. Marcus looked back at Colin, who was still shaking from the ordeal. And yet, here you are, Marcus muttered, his instincts screaming at him to stay on edge. Colin's wild eyes and his mysterious disappearance weren't sitting right. There was more to him than he was letting on. Marcus crossed his arms, still watching Colin carefully. He wasn't sure if this was just another survivor, or a potential problem. Marcus glanced over to Julia, who stood quietly, her sharp eyes fixed on Colin. She was already in her element, studying him without saying a word, reading every subtle movement, every flicker of his expression. She was building a profile of him in her mind, something she did instinctively, almost without realizing it. Marcus turned back to Colin, his gaze hard but measured. Well, you're safe for now, he said, though the edge in his voice suggested that safety might be conditional. Later that same day, everyone sat around the dimly lit room, exhaustion weighing heavily on them. Shadows danced along the walls as the faint light flickered, and the tension of the earlier encounter lingered in the air. They were all tired, none of them having slept much since arriving at the mansion, and hunger gnawed at their stomachs, adding to the discomfort.
Beneath the sun, I walk alone, carrying shadows I've never shown. The weight of loss, the scars I bear, a path of darkness, but you're my air. I see the fire behind your eyes, the man who fights, the one who tries. Your silence speaks of battles lost, but I will stand through every cost. We're running through the dark with the fire in our hearts. The monsters in the night can't take away our light. Through the cave into the fight, we are shadows in daylight. You hold the world upon your chest, but even soldiers need to rest. I'll be the calm beneath your storm, your guiding flame to keep you warm. You're the reason I still breathe through blood and stone. You're all I need. I'll burn this world, I'll tear it down to keep you safe no matter how. We're running through the dark with a fire in our hearts. The monsters in the night can't take away our light. Through the cave into the fight, we I fall, I'll carry you. If I break, I'll see you through. If they come, we'll stand as one. Together we'll fight until it's done. We're running through the dark with a fire in our hearts. The monsters in the night can't take away our light. Through the cave into the fight, we are shadows in daylight. A shadow lingers, a vow I've made to light the way through this endless shade. Through love and blood, we'll find the way. A shadow in daylight will light the day.